Damien Ward was known across the world as the coldest billionaire in the Western Hemisphere, a man whose empire spanned from tech to luxury resorts, but whose heart was a locked vault. He didn't do feelings, didn't entertain relationships, and certainly didn't care about innocence or romance-only results and control. His assistants rotated weekly, his mistresses never stayed the night, and his penthouse was as silent as his past. But all that began to shift the night he attended a gala at his own hotel, one he didn't want to be at in the first place. Amid fake laughs and clinking glasses, he spotted her small, quiet, and serving drinks with eyes too deep to belong to a stranger. She didn't look at him like the others. She didn't look at him at all. That was the first sign something in Damien Ward's world was about to fracture. And it started with a glass of wine and a single drop of crimson. Her name was Elara, and she wasn't supposed to be working that night. She had picked up the shift to cover rent after her roommate vanished without paying. When she turned it fast, the tray slipped, and red wine splashed across the billionaire's tailored Armani suit like spilled blood. The ballroom went silent, gasps echoing around them, and Elara froze, certain she was about to be fired or worse. But Damien didn't yell, didn't flinch. He simply looked down, then met her eyes with a strange calmness. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low and unreadable. "Elara," she stuttered, gripping the empty tray like a shield. He stared at her, then simply said, "Follow me." Everyone watched as the man who never forgave humiliation walked away with her in his shadow. Elara followed him in silence, her heart pounding as they entered the private elevator at the back of the ballroom. She had never been this close to someone so powerful, and his presence felt like pressure against her skin. "I'll have a new suit in 5 minutes, he said, glancing at her without emotion. "But I need to know something first." She swallowed hard, terrified. "Was it an accident?" he asked. "Or were you trying to get my attention like the others?" Her eyes widened with offense. "I didn't even know who you were," she replied honestly. That answer caught him off guard, and for the first time in years, Damien Ward felt something real spark inside him. In his penthouse suite, Damien handed her a towel and a glass of water, more curious than angry. Elara dabbed her hands, but when she pressed against her hip, she winced, and Damien noticed the small bloom of red staining her dress. "You're bleeding," he said, suddenly concerned. "It's nothing," she lied, standing too fast and swaying slightly. He moved before thinking, steadying her by the arms. And that's when he saw blood on the inside of her thigh, fresh, sharp, and unnatural. "Did someone hurt you?" he asked, his voice dropping. "No," she said, then added quietly, "It's the first time I've It was never supposed to happen here." Realization hit him like a wave. This wasn't just blood. This was the truth she had never told anyone. And everything inside Damien Ward changed in an instant. Damien took a full step back, as if the gravity of what he had just realized demanded space, not closeness. He had seen many things in his ruthless career, but innocence real. Innocence was something he had long stopped believing in. Elara stood frozen, humiliated and trembling, her hand pressed to her hip like she could will the pain and blood away. "You're safe," he said softly, in a voice that surprised even himself. "I won't touch you. I just... wasn't expecting this." Tears threatened to escape her eyes, but she swallowed them down, trying to stay professional, despite the overwhelming shame. "You don't have to fire me," she said quietly. "I'll leave on my own." But Damien shook his head slowly. "No, Elara, you won't leave, not like this." And something in the way he said her name made her knees weaken. He brought her to a guest room in his penthouse, not as a conquest, but as a gesture no one would have expected from Damien Ward. "You need rest and safety," he said simply, handing her a fresh change of clothes and motioning to the ensuite bathroom. Elara hesitated, looking at the plush bed, the marble, the skyline view. This world was not hers. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice cautious. Damien didn't answer right away. "Because if someone else found you like this tonight, they might not have stopped." His words hit her harder than she expected, and in that moment, the walls she had built to survive, her life began to crack. She nodded slowly, accepting his help but not his pity. And when he closed the door behind him, he leaned against it, shaken by how badly he wanted to protect something so pure. Damien poured himself a drink in the living room, but the scotch didn't burn the thoughts out of his mind like it used to. Images of Elara's blood, her trembling lips, her raw honesty haunted him more than any billion-dollar deal ever had. He remembered a night long ago, when someone he once loved had whispered, "I wasn't ready, too late." It had changed everything, made him colder, harder, until there was nothing left to give. But now, a waitress with broken shoes and paint under her nails had reignited something he thought was dead. He didn't want to own her, didn't want to seduce her. He just wanted her to feel safe again, and that terrified him more than anything. When Elara woke the next morning, the guest room was warm with light and silence. A breakfast tray sat on the table, fruit, tea, toast, and a handwritten note. "You don't owe me anything, but if you want to talk, I'm in the study." She stared at the note, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and gratitude. Most men she had known wanted something, always something, but Damien hadn't even tried to stay near her. Tentatively, she dressed and walked down the quiet hall. finding him at a grand piano with his back turned. "You play?" she asked gently. He didn't look at her, just answered, "Only when I can't speak." He poured her tea without a word, then finally sat across from her, his eyes softer than she remembered. "You don't have to explain anything," he said first, surprising her, but she shook her head. "I want to," she whispered. "It happened last night because I was scared and pushed someone away. I cut myself in the struggle, but it was mine to lose, and I didn't think it would matter to anyone." Damien leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Elara, it matters to me. Not because it's rare but because it was yours, and you had every right to protect it." She didn't know what to say, because no one had ever spoken to her like that, not even her parents. In his silence, Damien was saying more than anyone ever had. After breakfast, Elara gathered her things, unsure if this was the end, or just an unusual beginning. Damien walked her to the elevator himself, not with arrogance, but with a strange kind of reverence. "If you ever feel unsafe again," he said quietly, "you can call me. No questions, no strings." She nodded, gripping the paper he handed her with his number written in a sharp, precise hand. As the doors closed between them, Damien felt something unnameable twist inside his chest, and Elara, clutching that paper like a lifeline, stepped back into the world, changed, shaken, and wondering if that night was just a collision of pain, or the start of something much deeper. Days passed, and Damien didn't hear from her, not a call, not a message. He told himself it was better that way, that she needed space, and that he had no right to chase someone so untouched by his world. But each night, he found himself thinking of her eyes, the way she flinched at kindness, the blood that told a story louder than words. Elara returned to her small apartment, determined to forget the man who saw her more deeply than anyone ever had. Yet she caught herself checking her phone, rereading the number on the card. Neither of them knew what they were waiting for, but something between them refused to disappear. One rainy evening, Elara returned home to find Damien standing outside her building with no umbrella, soaked but calm. "You didn't call," he said softly, as if that explained why he was there. She stared at him in disbelief. "Why would you come here?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I couldn't stop thinking about the way you looked when you said no one ever protected you." She hesitated, her keys shaking in her hand. "Do you want to come in?" she asked. "Only if I'm allowed to leave everything but honesty at the door," he replied, and for the first time, she smiled. Elara's apartment was small but warm, filled with books, candles, and half-finished art. Damien moved like a man afraid to disturb it, sitting at the edge of the couch while she made tea. "I didn't think someone like you would drink chamomile," she said, handing him a mug. "I didn't think someone like me would be invited into a place like this," he replied. They talked for hours, not about what happened, but about music, travel, childhood, things no one ever asked Damien about anymore. When she leaned her head on his shoulder by accident, he froze, then relaxed, as if her trust meant more than touch. That night, he left with nothing but a cup of tea in his hands, and more clarity than he'd had in years. Unfortunately, someone saw him leave. A paparazzo who'd followed Damien that week, hoping for scandal, caught the photo. The billionaire, stepping out of a poor neighborhood, from a woman's door. By morning, tabloids exploded. Damien Ward's secret lover. A poor waitress in the city. Elara was horrified. Her job called and suspended her. Her landlord increased the rent. The calm she had fought so hard for vanished in one headline. Damien's lawyer offered to erase everything, but Elara refused. "I don't want you fixing me. I want you listening." And so Damien did something he hadn't done in years. He asked her, "Then tell me what you need." Damien wanted to offer her a private apartment, security, even a new job. But Elara shook her head at each suggestion. "I don't want to live in a glass box because I accidentally mattered to a billionaire," she said. "I just want to be Elara, not your secret or your scandal." Damien admired her strength, but inside, he hated how powerless he felt. "Then, let me help you another way," he said. He offered to fund an art exhibit under her name, with no ties to him. "Your work deserves to be seen," he added. Elara hesitated, then whispered, "Only if I can pay you back, every cent." He smiled. "Then I'll consider it an investment in someone who finally made me feel again." The small gallery in Brooklyn was packed. Elara's paintings, vivid, aching, full of emotion, lined the walls like windows into her soul. Damien stood in the back, unnoticed, watching the way strangers cried in front of her work. Elara wore a simple black dress, her hair pinned back, her eyes glowing with quiet strength. She spotted him across the room and didn't flinch. She walked toward him. "You came," she said. "Of course," he replied. "I came for you, not just the art." That night, they didn't kiss, but he held her hand in full view of the world, and for Elara, that meant more than any secret touch. Days later, a man from Elara's past showed up, her ex-stepfather, the reason she had once run away from home. He came with threats, claims of debt, and hints of secrets he could sell to tabloids. Elara was terrified, but when she called Damien, his voice was calm and razor. "No one threatens you and walks away," he said. Within 24 hours, the man had disappeared from the city's radar. "What did you do?" she asked. Scared of the answer, Damien looked at her carefully. Nothing illegal, but I used every connection I had to make sure he'd never get within 100 miles of you again. And for once, she didn't argue. She just hugged him tightly, like maybe she was ready to believe in safety. It happened late one night after too much laughter and not enough thinking. They were alone, close, leaning in too far. Damien touched her cheek, and she closed her eyes, but just as their lips brushed, she pulled back. I'm not afraid, she said, breathless. I just don't want this to be a thank you. Damien stepped back immediately. Then we won't, he said. We'll wait until it's not gratitude, until it's want. That restraint, more than passion, undid her completely. Because he wasn't trying to own her, he was trying to be worthy of her. News broke that Damien Ward had donated a massive sum to the city's art district. Then reporters linked it to Elara. Commentators mocked her as a gold digger, an artist bought by a billionaire's guilt. Elara wanted to disappear again, but Damien told her something that stayed in her bones. Let them talk. The people who matter won't believe them, and the ones who do never mattered anyway. She still hated the attention, but something about standing next to Damien, even under fire, made her feel taller. Maybe this wasn't about surviving anymore. Maybe it was about rising. They sat on the rooftop of his penthouse one night, watching the city lights flicker like stars. Elara turned to him and asked, Have you ever been in love? Damien didn't lie, not until now. But I haven't said it because I want it to mean something when I do. She nodded slowly. Then don't say it yet. Just show it. He reached for her hand and held it over his heart. Then stay here, with me, he whispered. No titles, no expectations, just ... stay. And she did. Because love didn't always need to be spoken. Sometimes, it only needed to be safe. Elara hadn't planned to spend the night. She never had before, but that evening felt different. The city outside was loud, but the penthouse was wrapped in a stillness that felt like safety. Damien offered her the guest room like always, but this time, she shook her head. Can I just stay beside you? She asked, barely above a whisper. He didn't hesitate. Yes, but we sleep. Just sleep. They lay fully clothed on top of the covers, her head on his chest, his arm wrapped gently around her back. Neither spoke for a long time, afraid that breaking the silence would shatter whatever magic held them together. That night, no lines were crossed, but hearts began to open in a way that neither of them could deny anymore. At a meeting days later, Damien was pitched an opportunity to acquire a publishing company, one owned by the same media empire that had dragged Elara through the mud. The deal was lucrative, but he couldn't shake the image of her face when she read those headlines. His board didn't understand when he walked away from the deal. It's personal, was all he said. That night, Elara found out and confronted him. You can't throw away your empire for me, she insisted. I didn't, he replied. I just decided I won't make money by standing on the same ground that tried to destroy you. She didn't respond. She just reached out and held his hand tightly, no longer questioning his loyalty. Elara surprised him one morning with a covered canvas and a nervous smile. I've been working on this since the gala, she said, setting it on an easel in his study. When Damien lifted the cloth, he froze. The painting was of him, not his face exactly, but the essence of him layered in stormy grays and burning golds, power and pain blending on the canvas. This is how you see me, he asked softly. Not always, she replied, but it's who you were the night we met, before you let me in. He stepped forward and kissed her forehead gently. Then keep painting. I want to see the man. You think I'm becoming... A letter arrived, addressed to Elara. No. Return address. Just her name. Inside was a photo from her childhood and a line written in familiar, sharp handwriting. Still hiding. They always find you. She hadn't seen that handwriting in years, not since her real father disappeared after her mother's death. Panic flooded her body as she clutched the paper, her knees given out. Damien caught her before she hit the floor, his eyes scanning the letter, face darkening with fury. I'll find out who sent this, he promised, and they will never touch you again. But Elara wasn't crying this time. She was shaking with something stronger, rage, and the resolve to stop running. That night, Elara couldn't sleep, and Damien offered to stay beside her again. She lay in his arms trembling, then surprised herself when she whispered, Can I be closer? He didn't ask what she meant, he simply waited for her to lead. Slowly, she rested her hand over his heart and leaned into him, letting his warmth calm her fear. He kissed her temple, then her cheek, never demanding more. And when she turned to face him fully, pressing her lips softly against his, he exhaled, like he had been holding his breath for years. It was tender, reverent, healing, and when they stopped, she smiled faintly and said, That didn't break me. It made me feel real. Word of Damien's relationship with Elara reached someone who had power to hurt, not an investor, not the press, but his mother. She showed up uninvited, elegant and cold, her voice dripping with judgment. She's not one of us, Damien. You don't mix survival with legacy. He didn't let her finish. You taught me never to feel anything. She taught me how to live. I'm not going back. Elara overheard the conversation from the hall, and for a moment, she felt like an intruder in a life too large for her. But when Damien turned and saw her, he didn't falter. He reached for her hand and said, This is Elara, and she is exactly where she belongs. It wasn't planned, it never was with them. But that night, after weeks of whispers, confessions, and growing need, Elara didn't stop him. She guided his hand, kissed him like he was her choice, not her escape. Damien moved slowly, almost reverently, touching her like she was sacred. There was no rush, no pressure, just trust, built layer by layer. And when she whispered his name in the dark, he answered with his soul, not his body. That night, she gave herself not out of fear, but out of certainty. And he received her like the most fragile, powerful truth he'd ever been trusted with. Elara woke before dawn, curled in his arms, safe, but thoughts rushed back like a flood. Was she still herself? Would he see her differently now? She slipped out of bed and stood by the window, wrapped in his robe, heart in knots. Damien stirred and saw the shadow in her eyes. Did I do something wrong? He asked, voice thick with sleep and concern. She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. No, I just never thought something that gentle could still leave me feeling exposed. He got out of bed and stood beside her, wrapping his arms around her again. Then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure it never hurts, he whispered. And in that moment, she believed him. With Damien's support but no money attached, Elara launched her own solo gallery under her real name. No headlines, no secrets. The show was raw, emotional, full of pieces titled only with single words: truth, bruise, rise, safe. People wept, applauded, and bought every single one. She stood alone at the front that night, confident and glowing, until Damien appeared silently beside her. You didn't need me, he said. She smiled and slipped her fingers into his. No, but I'm glad you stayed anyway. And in the middle of the applause, the only sound that mattered was the quiet promise in their joined hands. One morning, Elara woke with a small cut on her hand from a broken cup. Damien rushed over, alarmed by the sight of blood, but laughed softly. This blood doesn't mean pain, she said. This one just means I'm alive. He kissed her hand gently, lingering over the wound like it was sacred. And in that moment, both of them realized the blood that had once marked fear had become a symbol of survival, of healing, of love. Because what began with a stain had turned into something they could both finally call home. Damien wasn't used to hospitals, not since he lost someone there long ago. But that day he found himself in one after stepping between Elara and a mugger outside her art class. The knife grazed his side, not deep, but enough to remind him that loving her meant bleeding for her, literally and emotionally. Elara sat beside his bed, clutching his hand, the memory of blood flashing again, but this time, it wasn't hers, and it wasn't shameful. Why would you do that? She whispered, tears falling freely. Damien looked at her like she was air. Because I'd rather bleed than let you be hurt again. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't just safe with him, he was safe with her too. After the attack, Damien insisted she move in. But this time, it wasn't about protection. It was about building something together. They turned one of his guest rooms into her studio, hung her paintings in the hallway, and replaced cold furniture with soft blankets and mismatched books. Elara filled the space with light, and Damien, slowly, filled it with laughter. You realize this place doesn't feel like a billionaire's fortress anymore, she teased one night. That's because you're here, he said simply. And because for once, I want someone to stay. And she did, because love had stopped being a place to hide, and become a place to grow. Damien didn't propose with a ring in a box or on a rooftop. Instead, one morning, he tied a small silver ribbon around her finger as she painted. What's this? She asked. A question, he answered. Do you want forever with someone who still doesn't always know how to speak, but who will never stop listening to you? Her brush dropped as she turned to him, stunned. Is this real? She asked. More real than anything I've ever signed, he said, and in that quiet, paint-covered moment, she whispered yes, not because he was perfect, but because he was honest. While organizing boxers for the move, Elara found an old notebook with her mother's handwriting, one she hadn't seen since childhood. In it were pages about Elar's birth, fears, strength, and one line that stopped her breath. My girl will survive the darkness and someone will love her for her light. She cried in Damien's arms for an hour that night, finally grieving the mother she lost and the child she had been. Damien didn't try to fix it. He just held her, kissed her hair, and promised, you've already made her proud. And for the first time, her past didn't feel like a chain, it felt like part of the reason she had become who she was. Elara sat at her desk and wrote a letter to the girl she had been on that first night, the one who spilled wine and tried to disappear. You thought you ruined everything, but that was the beginning, the letter said. She never mailed it, never showed it to Damien, but she read it to herself aloud in the mirror, tears streaming down her cheeks. It was the goodbye she never got to say to her fear, and it was also a thank you to the part of her that had survived long enough to find love. They didn't want a crowd, no white gowns, no red carpets, just Elara, in a pale blue dress, barefoot on the beach, and Damien, in rolled-up sleeves, smiling like he had never known joy before her. The officiant was a friend of her art mentor. The vows were written in a journal they would later bury beneath a tree near the shore. You're not saving me, she told him. You're walking beside me. He took her hands and said, And you're the only truth I ever wanted to keep. That night, there were no fireworks, just two people, dancing in silence. Finally, free. Weeks after the wedding, Elara stared at the test in her hand, breath caught in her throat. 2 lines. She laughed and cried all at once, unsure how to feel. When she told Damien, he was silent for a full minute, then dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to her belly. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I never thought I'd get to do this," he whispered. "I never thought I'd be trusted with something this pure." And in that moment, the billionaire who had built towers of glass broke, softly, into the man he was always meant to be. In her 8th month of pregnancy, Elara woke to pain and saw blood on the sheets. Panic gripped her, memories rushing back. Like a storm, Damien rushed her to the hospital, never letting go of her hand. But this time, blood didn't mean shamit, meant life. Hours later, she held their daughter in her arms, crying with gratitude and wonder. "Her name?" the nurse asked. Elara looked at Damien. "Hope," they said together. Because after everything, pain, silence. Fear. This child was the proof that love had won. Elara's next exhibit wasn't in a gallery. It was in a small park where children painted on blank canvases under the sun. Art should be for everyone, she told the local paper. Damien was there, holding baby Hope, proud but quiet, no spotlight needed. He no longer hid her, and she no longer hid herself. Their love wasn't flashy, it was foundational, built in silence, protected by truth, and rooted in everything real. That day, as kids laughed and paint flew, Elara kissed his cheek and whispered, "This is our legacy." And Damien, holding the child that completed him, whispered, "It's better than any empire I ever built." Years later, Elara sat in the same guest room where she had once bled and cried, now converted into their daughter's art space. She smiled, remembering the girl she used to be, the one afraid of being seen. Damien walked in, grayer now, but still carrying tea and warmth. "You still thinking about that night?" he asked gently. "Always," she said, "because that night, everything changed." He sat beside her, kissed her knuckles, and said, "And it wasn't because of blood, it was because love refused to run away." And as the sun set beyond their windows, their story didn't end. It just kept painting itself forward, stroke by stroke, heart by heart.